and welcome to episode 2 of the Guns on Pegs podcast. Huge thanks to everyone who listened to episode 1, and an especially huge thank you to everyone who got in touch to say how much they enjoyed it. And thank you also to everyone who got in touch with ideas for future episodes. If you're new to the podcast, my name's George, and I'm the marketing manager and editor at Guns on Pegs. For this episode, once again, I'm joined by Chris Horn, managing director of Guns on Pegs. Say hi, Chris. How have things been down in Kent this last week or so?
We're on top 4 now. The Baroccas haven't made a comeback since our last episode, so all good down here, thank you.
Excellent. And very exciting, this week we've got our very first special guest in the shape of wild food chef Tim Maddams. Tim, thanks very much for joining us.
That's okay. I hope the technology down here in Devon doesn't let us down. Nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
It's good to have you with us. Now, everybody listening at home, you might know Tim from his appearances on River Cottage and Fish Fight with Hugh Fearnley-Whittingstall on Channel 4, and other food shows like Sunday Brunch, or maybe you've got one of his recipe books, one of which we recently included in our list of favourite game recipe books, or indeed from his writing for the Shooting Times. Tim, your website describes you as a free-range foodie. So what does that mean?
Well, that's a good question, isn't it? What does that mean? Well, that's very writerly of me to put something like that on the website. I think for me, it just describes the way I work, really, which is I don't have a restaurant. I'm not tied to any sort of one place. I roam about the country doing interesting foodie things with lots of different people, sometimes private clients, sometimes writing for someone, sometimes just it might be a collaborative event with a brewery or some mates, or all sorts of fun things that I get to do.
Fantastic. And I described you as a wild food expert. Would that be fair?
Oh no, absolutely not fair. I mean, first and foremost, I think it's really important that wild food fits into lots of different categories, right? I mean, you've got meat, you've got herbs and plants, and then you've got fungus, and then you've got fish. And those are all different specialties. And so I would suggest that the term expert, so that we don't end up discussing X as in has been and a spurt as in a drip under pressure, is definitely not what I am. Because to be an expert, I guess, in wild food, you'd need to be a botanist, a mycologist, a butcher, as well as a livestockman, a fisherman and a fishmonger, and all of those things rolled into one. Now, what I definitely have a little bit of interest in all of those fields, and I know a fair amount about wild food, but I don't want to be known as an enthusiast either, because I think that's sort of bad in another way. But can we put me somewhere in the middle?
That sounds fine. Yep. And so, well, obviously you're on our podcast, so you must have an interest in shooting. So can you tell us how you got into shooting, and maybe about your first game bird?
Oh, see, I was gonna raise that. Is it all right if my first game bird is a rabbit? Is that all right?
I think we'll allow it. Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't flying. Obviously, it was quite low. But and then my first I think the first bird I ever shot with a shotgun would have been a pigeon, because I was out popping rabbits and one flew out of the hedge. I remember shooting this pigeon, and I'm to this day not sure who was more surprised, me or the pigeon. But I used to wander around my auntie and uncle's little sheep farm with my aunt's 20-bore little thing under my arm, desperately trying to pop off a few rabbits. That's sort of how I got started.
So, Tim, you're a big promoter, I think, of wild food in general, but more specifically game. And I think you're a supporter of the Country Food Trust. Is that right?
Absolutely right. Yeah. So the Country
He's
Food Trust.
a trustee. I'll butt in there. That's how Tim and I spend quite a lot of time together, as trustees of the Country Food Trust, and so he's been very active. I'll say it now. He's been hugely active and a huge asset to the charity over the last few weeks, specifically during the time that we're in at the moment. So yeah, Tim, I'll tee you up there to chat about what you've been up to on that front, because I think right now it's sort of more timely than ever.
Oh, thanks very much, Chris. Yeah, so George, I mean, I have been involved with the Country Food Trust for quite a few years now, as I know Chris has too, so I developed some pouches with them, which is obviously one of our products. We take game meat and we turn it into meals to give away to people who are in need. And at the moment, we're in a lot of strife in this country, as you know, and all around the world. So there's a lot of people in a lot of need for a lot of different reasons. And so just recently, I've been donning my driver's cap as well and helping to deliver some food around the country that the charity has had in store, as well as help to support the current fundraiser.
And can you give us an update on how that fundraiser's going? I know that there'd been some pretty sizable donations and that it was going pretty well.
Yeah, I think I had a little look on the fundraising page on Virgin Money Giving today, and I think we were over £125,000. Chris, you might have a more recent update than that. I've been a bit off radar.
No, it's about there, about 125 grand. But there's also quite a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes as well. I think the actual number could be a little bit higher. It's amazing how much this has resonated with people. I think obviously when stuff like this occurs, it really is a case of right back to the grindstone. The basic human needs come right to the fore, and that's why this appeal has resonated so well. So yeah, I think it could be a lot bigger, but the Country Trust, where it does take us, is the Country Trust has now delivered over 700,000 meals to people in need.
Because Chris, you're a trustee as well, aren't you?
Yeah. So Tim and I enjoy doing that together, yeah.
Yeah, and it would be good just to give people an idea, when we say £125,000 has been raised, just how many people that will feed.
Yeah, and this particular appeal it's not. This is not admin of the charity or anything else. This is straight into food, and it's essentially £1 per meal. That's kind of what it works out at. So this one so far, 125,000 people. We've also, because of the situation, obviously there's a lot of food that's been purchased, and there is sort of shortages in different types of meat. So we're now diversifying the charity slightly to make sure that we can get our hands on whatever comes available. Tim, and you could probably give a bit more of this. I know that in the last couple of weeks there's been a lot of sausages, venison, a bit of everything, anything that sort of comes from the countryside that's got that we've got access to through our donors. We'll get our hands on.
Quite right, Chris. And I think it's lovely that we focus on using pheasant, and we've stretched our wings recently to start delivering venison as well, and we're looking into some vegetarian products. But in the short term, as you say, basically any countryside produce from the UK that we can get our hands on at a good price, we're just moving that to people in need. And I think right now that's the great thing about our charity, is we've been able to respond and react so quickly. I mean, hats off to Tim Woodward, our CEO, because he's been incredibly quick to turn around from what 2 months ago our plan was to basically tick over until we did some more fundraising ahead of next shoot season starting, and produce some more meals then, and we've gone from a standing start of doing that to raising funds. We've got food in production right now in Yorkshire. We've got game on the way up there. We're delivering minced venison, we're delivering chicken, we're delivering duck, we're delivering all sorts of stuff all over the country, as well as the remainder of the pouches from the last run, which have gone up to various charities, including a trip up to London last week to St Mungo's.
Yeah, and the pouches are the pheasant casserole and the pheasant curry. And I think one of the reasons we've also had to diversify is obviously the production run of those is it's not something you can get done really quickly, but also we're going to have a bit of a shortage of game at the moment, certainly with this situation that's arisen. It's probably not going to be a massive amount knocking around that we're going to be able to get our hands on at a good price like we've been able to in the last couple of years. So that's definitely an issue for the charity. But as long as our donors are there, we'll find stuff, like we have been now.
Yeah, it's really impressive how quickly it's all been turned around. And I should say at this point that if anybody does want to make a donation, we'll make sure that we put the link where you can do that in the text accompanying the podcast. So anybody who's listening to this and feels like donating a few quid will be able to do that. So gents, I think it's time for us to move on to what is already my favourite part of the podcast, 2 episodes in, and it's called What's That You're Drinking? Because mine's basically exactly the same as last week, I'm going to go first and say that I'm about halfway down my small glass of whiskey, and then after that I've got a can of San Miguel to wash it down with. It is, as last week, it's a little bit early in the day for whiskey, so I did put a little bit of water in it, but it's bank holiday weekend, so I feel like it's probably all right. Chris, what have you got today? You on Barocca still? No, you said you're not.
Last week I was on a beer. This week I'm on a gin and tonic. Now, I know that that's a bit boring, but specifically I'm on an Adnams Copperhouse gin and tonic. Adnams because it's from Suffolk. Suffolk's where I grew up. So anything from Suffolk I'm very loyal to, including Aspel cider. I should have had one of those actually. Maybe I'll go and get one of them in a minute.
If you put some gin in the cider, you can drink an old-fashioned West Country cocktail called a dog's nose.
A dog's nose. That's a good shout.
Is that how it makes you feel the next day?
Hey, talking of gin in cider, I used to home brew my own cider, and I still do slow gin and everything else. And I had mates come round, and this cider was about 10%. And I used to put a quarter of a pint of slow gin in the bottom and top it up with my 10% cider, and it would go down like a normal snakebite type drink. And this was sort of post uni, and it just, I mean, one pint of that and it killed everyone. It was absolutely brilliant.
We call that a slider.
Yes.
So yeah, gin and tonic for me at the moment. But if you guys have got two, then I'll be running out the room in a minute and going to stock up.
Well, I haven't got two drinks actually, but I wanted to talk about two, because I think it's important to explain, first and foremost. Well, because obviously of the wild food aspect of things, now is a good time to be thinking about the future in terms of drinks, right? Because it's a little while before the elderflower is going to start. There's a bit of water mint about, so I guess you could get some water mint from by your pond or near a stream if you're out for your daily walk. And so we're a little way away from elderflower champagne, but you could pick some water mint and maybe use that to make a little syrup with some sugar, and then you could just add that to some vodka for a little martini, shake that over some ice.
Ooh.
What I'm going to be drinking while we talk about this, though, is some proper lockdown fare here. Okay, and I'm going to make it while I talk you through the ingredients. Okay, it starts with the wine.
Oh wow!
So too limited for time. So, first of all, I've got a little shaker full of ice here because I think that's quite important, and I'm gonna put some ice into my crystal glass here. Just I don't know if you can hear that, but that'll be good. And then I've left some in the shaker as well because I'm going to add to that some rum. Now, this is Fiji Overproof Bounty rum. Now, this is not something that you would ever choose to buy. This was left at a drinks party at a friend's house about 10 years ago. Last year, when they emigrated to Canada, they left it behind. And not being one to like to see booze go to waste, I thought, well, I'll take that. So I tried to drink some and realised how revolting it was. And then I put some cloves in it and some sugar and a load of mint that I had kicking around. And I left it in the cupboard. And I got it out about 3 months later and thought, oh, that'll be better now. And it was still revolting. And I got it out recently because I've run out of everything else to drink in my lockdown scenario. And so I decided it must be time to bring out the Bounty 58% alcohol by volume overproof rum and give it a go. Only problem is it's still revolting. So I thought what I've done is I've got some fresh blood orange juice here, which I got from some oranges that were going to get thrown out, and I managed to pick those up at a little food hub the other day where I was. So I've put some of that into my little cocktail shaker. You can probably hear it going in. And I'm going to top that up with a bit of rum, not too much because it is overproof and pretty revolting. So I just put a little bit of that in there. And then a bit of cinnamon, a bit of powdered cinnamon. You've probably got a bit of that kicking around at home. Just chuck a bit of that in there. And so we're going in the old sort of rum punch scenario here. Make sure your cocktail shaker's done up. Give it a little shake and then pour that out over some ice. And that'll be my little drink to have while we have a chat. And like that, and I've literally probably gone 1 part rum to about 5 parts blood orange juice. That is just about, that's just about palatable now. So that's good. But there's nothing wild foodie or local about that. So I wanted to talk about a drink you can make now that will be ready in about a year. Is that okay? Have I got time to do that?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, before you do that now, I want to know if you've got a name for the concoction that you've just brewed up.
I don't know. I think, what should we call it? I mean, it's a sort of it's not really very nice. I think it's a cocktail like this should be called something like sheer desperation.
Perfect. I think that'll do nicely.
Okay. So I'm going to have my sheer desperation.
That was a rum orange cinnamon. That was it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Just basically a little rum cocktail, just like a rum punch, really, but just shaken over a bit of ice, bit of loveliness in there. So, Okay, sorry, I feel like I'm taking over your podcast a little bit, George, but I'm going to carry on talking for 4 minutes and then I'm going to
No,
shut
please
up.
do. That's why you're here.
All right. So you can't see, obviously, because we're on radio rather than on telly. But you can't see is that I'm clasping a bit of blackthorn twig in my hands that I've plucked from the hedgerow on my dog walk today. Chris, have you got a bit as well?
I have got a bit. Yeah, I've got a bit right in front of me.
As have I.
Oh, George, you managed to get some. I had no idea where you were.
Yeah.
Oh, okay,
I-
you've got some.
I was fascinated by the fact you said you texted us earlier saying grab a bit of blackthorn for the podcast, and I'd just been looking at it in the garden thinking how great it looked this week, and then you asked me to go clip it. I thought it was very ironic.
So it does look beautiful, doesn't it, in the hedgerow, like big falls of lace kind of scattered along the hedgerow. And that first flower to come out generally in the hedgerow is the hawthorn, right? So we see that first, and then the blackthorn is normally the last hedgerow, a sort of deciduous hardwood hedgerow thing to flower, apart from the elder, which will go any minute now, will start sort of springing up and leaping into action. And the name for blackthorn at this time of year is the May tree. Okay, George, have you ever heard the phrase "cast no clout till May be out"?
I have. My prep school headmaster used to refuse to allow summer dress until it was 25 degrees or something, and he used to quote that at us the whole time.
Okay. Yeah, and you thought, what's this old nutter on about? Yeah, exactly. So there's a folklore attached to that, or as I understand it, and these things can get they can get confused in handing down the generations, particularly after a couple of sheer desperations. What happens is the idea is that the blackthorn comes into bloom after the last chance of a severe hard frost. Okay, so the idea is that you wait until you see these big falls of lace of the blackthorn tree blossoming, and that's when you know you can start to leave your big winter coat at home.
Yes, that was what he always told us as well. Yeah,
That's good to know.
Great. So that bit we understand. Now, have you got some almost but not quite open buds of the flower on your little bit of blackthorn twig there?
Yes, I believe I do. Yeah.
Okay, great. I'd like you to pluck one or two of those off and just pop them in your mouth and chew them up a little bit. And I want you to tell me whether they A, taste slightly bitter, and B, taste slightly of almond.
Honestly, this could be anything you're asking me to do right now. I mean, for all I know, there's some sort of mad thing about it. It's probably poisonous, but anyway, I'll carry on.
No. If it was poisonous, we probably wouldn't put the berries in our sloe gin, because of course blackthorn is sloe tree as well. It's got a lot of names. The blackthorn.
Okay, the flower's in my mouth.
Okay, any bitterness?
Yeah, a bit.
Yeah, so you should get a sort of astringent, almost, and I get quite a bit of almond out of it, but not everyone does. And once the flowers have opened, it tastes less like that. But at the very end of the twigs, you'll probably notice that there's a few little tiny green leaves starting to emerge as well.
Yeah.
Okay, and once they...
Yeah, I think Tim, I think here in Hampshire, I reckon we might be a bit further along than you guys are, because I haven't really got any flowers or flower buds at all, but I've got an awful lot of leaf.
Okay, well, so take some of the small leaf and chew a bit of that up, give that a little nibble as well, because what you find is that it's got a sort of bitter almond flavour to it, and as the leaves get a little bit bigger than they are now, basically once the last of the blossom has dropped and most of the first lot of leaves are sort of coming up to being a decent sort of pea size or a little bit bigger, you can pluck a load of those off. And the French, I say that in quite a generalistic way, the French, I'm sure that not all the French do this, but in France, there is an origin of this drink called épine, E-P-I-N-E, with an acute circumflex over the E at the start, not the last E. I don't know how I pronounce that. You guys are probably a bit better at your foreign than me. They take the leaves, they mix them with sugar, red wine, and marc, or brandy, basically. The brandy stops the wine re-fermenting with the sugar, the same as you would if you were going to make your own elderberry port. But the leaves from the blackthorn give that lovely, slightly bitter, almondy flavour. But once you've done it, you have to leave it for a year or at least 3 months before you pass it off and then drink it. So that's why I thought we could make it today or in the coming season, because it's just about to be ready to do that. We could make a bottle, and then we could talk again in a year's time and see how you got on.
That sounds like an epic plan.
That sounds great.
Just give us a really brief recap then. So just quick process, what to put in.
If I was going to make a sort of standard let's say, wine bottle sized amount. Let's take the wine bottle that we've got the red wine in. It doesn't need to be brilliant red wine. Certainly don't waste the fine wine on this. But tip it into a jug or something. And then into the wine bottle, I'm going to put, let's say, I'm going to put 2 ounces of sugar. You don't need a lot. 2 ounces of sugar. And then I'm going to put in a handful, a good cupped handful of the leaf. I'm going to poke those all in. I'm going to rinse them off under the tap. Then I'm going to poke them down into the wine bottle. Then I'm going to add up to probably about, I certainly want to cover the sugar and the leaf with brandy, but I don't want any more than 1/5 of a bottle of brandy in there, in the bottle, as in the wine bottle. We don't want more than 1/5 of that to be cheap brandy. And then I'm going to top the rest of that up with the red wine. Now, what's happened immediately is brilliant, because there's now more wine in the jug than will fit back in the bottle. So straight away, you've legitimately got a reason that you need to drink that wine. So you can drink that wine, put the cork back in the bottle, write a little label about what it is, give it a good shake. And I'd suggest you sort of give it a shake every couple of days for the next for the next week or something, until the sugar's all dissolved. Then put it away, leave it in the cupboard. And in 3 months or so, maybe set a reminder or something, or just forget about it until you find it again. In 3 months, you might take it out and drain it off the leaves, and then rebottle it and leave it for a bit longer. But to be honest, it's not the end of the world if you don't. It just might go a little bit gritty and a bit cloudy. And in a year's time, you will have this very obscure French drink, and it comes about, like all these things, out of the need, really. So French wine, we all know there's lots of great French wine, but they also produce an awful lot of mouthwash, and that until recently was made into port and other things. And this is just sort of a homemade way, really, of using some of your sort of slightly iffy, rough wine and turning it into something a little bit better.
That's mega knowledge, and
That sounds fantastic. I can't wait to give that a go.
Yeah, I agree.
You will have to be patient, because it does take a while to make. But, but once it's there, you'll be away.
So Tim, I've got a question. I mean, obviously you've got all this knowledge about the various things you get up to. I mean, we've spoken about mushrooms quite a bit, and I remember one particular funny episode, walking to a peg. I'm not sure if it's for consumption on the podcast, but I'll go with it anyway. Your knowledge of mushrooms is quite exceptional, and I remember waking up hungover on the sofa one Sunday morning, flicking on the TV and seeing you on Sunday brunch with a whole tray of mushrooms, getting very excited about them all, which did make me laugh a lot. When walking to the peg, I remember you telling me that you could pretty much guarantee you could find a magic mushroom in this field by the time you get to your peg. I don't know if there's much truth in that, but tell me a bit about this love for mushrooms, because I think it's absolutely brilliant.
Oh, fungus. I mean, what is there not to love about fungus? I think, right, this is it. Let's start at the beginning. For me, the wild food thing, right, where that comes into my thing is, there's 2 types of wild food. There's stuff you can eat and is useful for medicine, and then there's stuff that is mind-blowingly brilliant. Okay, and for me, mushrooms are up there. So there's some mushrooms you can find that are a bit rubbish, but you wouldn't bother learning to find them and identify them, right? You just go, oh, that's some mushroom I'm not interested in, and that's where I draw my line. I'm not interested in knowing about a plant that's edible unless it really tastes great. I'm not going to waste my time cluttering up my already frankly disorganized and useless mind with information that isn't going to feed me or enhance my life. I mean, it's like celandine. Have you seen common celandine in the fields at the moment? It's everywhere. Yellow flowers, little tiny green heart-shaped leaves with a mottling on them. Someone asked me the other day, can you eat celandine? I was like, I don't think you can. And I looked it up, and you can't eat it. Well, you could, but it wouldn't be very nice. It's very bitter, very astringent, but it is good for as a remedy for piles. Well, I mean, really? I mean, in this day and age, for a start, I don't know how to. I mean, I'm not interested in how you begin to apply that. And secondly, I think we've moved on from there. So mushrooms for me represent the absolute sort of zenith of foraging in the autumn. Right now, there's a brilliant spring mushroom around, or there will be any time now, called the St. George's mushroom, which comes out traditionally around St. George's Day, and that is a meadowland mushroom and probably an exception from the autumn rule. And the other one that would be an exception right now would probably be the morel, although we're a little way away from that, I'd have thought. Apart from that, it's more or less autumn time action, which means it lends itself very well to a lot of the game birds that we start to eat at that time of year, and so it all sort of fits in quite well. But mushrooms, the great thing about them is if you know what 3 of them look like, so let's say penny barncep, whatever you want to call it, porcini, chanterelle, and let's say hedgehog mushroom. If you pick those 3 mushrooms and learn how to identify them, you can identify them quite easily. They're all fairly safe. You can pick those mushrooms in good quantity without having any kind of stress in your life about them, as long as you're reasonably careful. And they are the most phenomenal ingredients. They're worth a fortune to chefs. People love eating them, they're truly unique and delicious flavors. When you add to that the fact that mushrooms basically control a lot of the environmental biological processes on the planet. So, for example, without yeast, which is a fungus, we wouldn't have any wine. That's pretty shocking. So we need to be happy about that. Without the fungus holding the soil together, you'd have no soil because it would all get washed away. Mycelium, which is the root network, if you like, the single 1 cell wall thick root network of the mushrooms that live in the soil, but not the fruiting body, which is the actual mushroom that you see, but the kind of the roots of the plant, if you like. It's not a plant, it's a fungus, but you get me. These incredible structures can hold 10 times their own weight in water, so they're fantastic for water retention. I mean, fungus is just brilliant, and they're using so the psilocybin mushroom, the magic mushroom that you and I were talking about. This is our native psilocybin mushroom, which is the liberty cat mushroom, Psilocybin semilantia. That is that psilocybin inside there, which is the active ingredient that gives you the exciting time, if that were your thing and you were into that. Probably not before shooting would be my advice.
I was going to say, I think we should probably put a very clear message here that we do not, under any circumstances, encourage taking magic mushrooms before shooting. I think that's an important message to put out.
Or at all. We're not condoning that. No, we're not condoning illegal activity, definitely not. But they are developing medicines for the use of treatment for end-of-life care, and also for depression and eating disorders, all from that mushroom species. So that's quite an impressive thing. Mushrooms have a huge amount to offer us. You can grow oyster mushrooms on toxic waste and end up with waste that's no longer toxic and mushrooms you can eat. So, we mustn't overlook the value of mushrooms in the coming challenges ahead of us.
That's fascinating.
So you've spoken quite passionately about mushrooms, and I'm going to hazard a guess and say that they're up there with your favourite wild foods. But sort of brings me quite nicely on to one of the questions that I wanted to ask you about. What is your least favourite wild food? Maybe even your least favourite game meat? The thing that lots of people love, but you just can't see what all the fuss is about.
Oh, that is a good one. Yeah. So my least favourite game meat, to be honest, it's probably red stag in rut. I mean, I can understand why you want to go and shoot a roaring stag, but if you've seen one covered in its own urine mixed with Highland bog water, which it's been rolling about in for so long, it's got so obsessed, and we all do this perhaps when we're teenagers, but it's become so obsessed with breeding that it's forgotten to eat anything for several weeks, and then it gets shot, which is an important part of deer management. I get that, but the meat, I mean, it's like you shoot a roebuck at the end of the rut. It's poor quality. It's lost all of its sort of fat. It's very lean. It's been worried about other stuff. It's not as bad as a red deer in rut, but the absolute epitome of meat that I don't want to eat is red deer stag that's been shot in the rut.
That's a good answer.
I completely understand, because I had an experience exactly as you say with a roe deer stag, buck rather, that somebody had kindly given me a shoulder from. And I think they're kind of awash with testosterone at that point as well, aren't they? And honestly, I cooked it, and you could smell it all the way down the corridor of the flat, and it was almost inedible. It was just not very pleasant.
It's like a cross between slightly livery, badly hung beef and the smell. The taste of the smell in an old school locker room. It's like that.
Yes. Sort of musty.
No, there's nothing good about it. I mean, and so I would say that that's my least favourite wild meat, definitely. But very happy to eat it when it's not in that state.
George, yours? What's yours?
Well, I think probably it would be that roe deer from the rut. That was really not an enjoyable experience. But so I won't be doing that again. Other than that, I'm pretty keen on most things. I'm not very brave about the about things like kidney and liver and that sort of stuff. So even even lamb's livers and that kind of stuff, they don't really do anything for me.
You need to get over that. You need to get over that. I mean, apart from the ethical argument of that if you're going to kill the animal, you must eat as much of it as you can. Some of the most delicious and tasty textural delights you will ever have come from the inside of the animal. I mean, but it's very important that it's very fresh and that you know how to cook it. And I think that is the big challenge with offal.
Yeah, I think that's probably where I've been going wrong. Chris, how about you? Have you got anything that you just can't be getting on with?
Yeah, so I think mine has to be woodcock. It's people are very sad when they hear me say that, but I don't shoot woodcock for that reason. I don't know, like you were describing with the school locker room smell. It's something about woodcock that I just can't get it. I can't get it down, and so I don't know why. That it's just much stronger than others for me. And
Chris, you must surely have heard. My dad always says that the best way to eat a woodcock is to put it on a piece of bread and put it in the oven, then take it out, throw the bird away, and eat the piece of toast.
Okay, well, I think you both you and your extended family need to have, both of you, the pair of you, need to have a word with yourself. I mean, I am very happy for other people not to eat woodcock, and I think we need to be very careful about how many woodcock we do eat, and I would say that for any wild resource, if you're picking mushrooms and there's a big patch of them, only take a third, leave a third for something else, and leave a third for next year to spawn and do all of that. And I apply the same to my woodcock shooting. Anyone who's seen me shoot will know that I probably don't need to worry about conservation too actively. But I would say that woodcock, cooked well, handled properly, which is important, not hung for too long, which is also important, and then cooked correctly, is one of the finest things you will ever eat, particularly with a little sort of runny, buttery sauce made by blending the half-cooked guts with some garlic and a bit of thyme. And
okay, I'll try it again if you cook it for me, Tim. Then we're
well. Do you know what?
That sounds like a deal.
I've got 3 woodcock I shot this year in Northumberland, or Cumbria anyway, in my freezer. So I think in a year's time we should get together. We should eat those woodcock and we should drink our vintages of Epine and see how we get on.
That sounds like a cracking plan. I'm really up for that.
Yeah, that sounds fantastic.
It makes a far change from having to talk over the internet, doesn't it? So yeah.
Yeah, hopefully by then we'll be allowed to actually meet in person. That'd be good.
Yeah. Well, exactly. Well, I mean, you say that, George. You've never met me. You don't know whether that's going to be a good thing or not.
Well, I'm sure it will be, Tim. I'm sure it will be. So, Tim, I've got one final question. And you don't have to answer if you don't want to, because you are a professional chef and I don't want to ruin any future business prospects for you. But can you tell us about a game cooking disaster that you might have had?
Well, I've witnessed a few.
Okay, no names.
Oh, no names. I think one of the biggest mistakes that you can make is to think, okay, this is right. Let me rephrase this a little bit. I'm going to use my own example. When I was new to game cookery, I remember choosing some big old cockbirds off the game cart because I thought that they were big and that would be the best. I'd be getting the best deal for my brace if I took a couple of big old cockbirds. I then took them home and I lovingly plucked them and gutted them and tried to roast them, having hung them for a couple of days. And they were tough and very strongly flavoured. And of course, that's not the cockbird's fault. It's my fault for approaching them and trying to do the wrong thing with the wrong thing. So what I would say is one of the biggest faux pas with game cookery is almost certainly trying to roast a pheasant that isn't roast worthy. If you imagine that a chicken that's reared for roasting would be sort of no more than 40 days old, really, by the time it goes for slaughter, you can begin to understand that a pheasant is older than that before it's even released at the beginning of October, right? Or released into the woods, say, in the middle of the summer for shooting in October. So a cock pheasant shot before sort of mid-November is probably going to be roastable. And a hen pheasant shot before Christmas is probably going to be roastable. But apart from that, you're sort of barking up the wrong tree. That doesn't mean they're not delicious to use in different ways, but I probably wouldn't be plucking them and roasting them. So having served a couple of very tough, very stringy and quite strongly flavoured roast cockbirds to a very unappreciative crowd of mates when I was about 19, I could say that that's probably the biggest game cooking faux pas I've ever taken part in.
That's really interesting, that.
It's a really good bit of advice as well, because I think that a lot of people are keen to introduce their friends to game who maybe haven't had the chance to have it before. And the temptation is to go, right, we're going to do a traditional roast and we're going to whack a bit of bacon on the top and put it in the oven, and it comes out dry and boring and not very exciting. And there's just so many other things that you can do, aren't there?
Well, and even if you are going to roast a pheasant, let's say you get a couple of nice hen birds from a early November shoot you've been out on, and you plot them and dress them and leave them in the fridge for 2 or 3 days after you've done that, so that they're controlled hanging without the guts in and everything else, so you get a nice bit of extra flavour to the birds. Even if you just sling those in a tray and try and roast them as you would a chicken from the shop, you're on a hiding to nothing. You've got to start with a really hot pan. I'd probably brush the outside with olive oil or some bacon fat, salt, pepper, thyme leaves, sage leaves, everything chucked in the pan, good glug of bacon fat or olive oil or dripping or whatever you're going to use, and roast the birds in the pan to start with, really hard on their backs, and then 2 minutes on each side, and then a minute on the breasts, and then flip them back over onto the back. And that pan, hopefully that's one that can go in a hot oven. Chuck it in the hot oven, give them 10 to 15 minutes, take them out, leave them to rest in the pan, having turned them back onto their backs when they go in the oven. When you take them out to rest, turn them back onto their breasts so that the juices can go down into the breast. That way you get great colour, you get good flavour from the bones, you're not over roasting the bird, and you're not waiting to get that colour and thus overcooking it in the process. They won't dry out, they'll be tender and delicious, but the rest is really important as well.
Fantastic. Well, that's really, really useful advice, and I'm sure lots of people will be trying that out. So, Tim, the final thing I want to ask you is, we've already discussed the government-mandated 1 hour of daily exercise. When people are out walking, what wild foods could they be looking out for at this time of year?
Right now, well, I mean, at the risk of upsetting everyone on Facebook who's definitely had enough posts about wild garlic, you could definitely be picking wild garlic at the moment. Cadbury's cream eggs, there's quite a few of those about. Three-cornered leek, have you heard of that? That's another allium plant. It's from the Indian subcontinent. Actually, it was brought over by Victorian gardeners. But that's a similar looking plant to wild garlic, but it's got a three-cornered sort of leaf. It's a bit taller, and it doesn't have the breadth of the leaf either, and it's not quite as dark green. Allium triquatum, if you want to look it up, that's a three-cornered leek. That's worth looking out for.
Would you find that in this? Would you find that in the same sort of environment as wild garlic, sort of, woody, dampish?
Yeah, woodland edges rather than within the wood. It doesn't like shade in the same way that wild garlic will tolerate it. So probably more, it's quite a common plant. You'll probably find it out and about. And if not, just when you're next trimming the garden and you smell onion, that's probably what you found. The other thing, there's vetch in the hedgerow at the moment, which is sort of the wild grandfather of pea. You'll see that. It looks a little bit like a pea plant. It's either got a yellow or a purple flower on it. Check what it is, obviously, before you eat it, because there's some nasties out there at the moment too. So hemlock, water drop wort, that's out. Looks like flat leaf parsley. Don't eat that. That'll kill you. Lords and ladies is which is the common orm, arum maculatum. Watch out for that. That's a sort of waxy leafed thing. That's not very nice. You don't want to eat that. Giant hogweed, that'll make your skin nasty. Its cousin, standard hogweed, you can eat that. Common hogweed, that's fine. What else is in the hedgerow at the moment? Let me think. Navel pennywort, you could pick that and eat that. It's also sometimes called wall pennywort. Sorrel, good old sheep sorrel, that's out and about as well. There's loads of stuff. Dandelion even is up and about. There's plenty of stuff out in the hedgerow.
What would you do with a dandelion?
What would I do with it? Well, we tend to feed them to the family tortoise, to be honest.
But Tim, I think you raised quite a good point there, which is if you are out foraging, don't eat anything unless you're absolutely certain what it is. And maybe even if you think you are certain, just double check as well, because there are some false friends out there, aren't there?
Well, I mean, the best way to test them is to feed them to elderly, wealthy relatives. If you're not sure what something is, that can land you in a pretty good situation. You either get a nice supper or a lump of inheritance.
Well, there's a plan.
I'm obviously not serious. George, you waited a little bit too long.
Well, I think having
He was definitely drinking
having
some of his
encouraged
whiskey.
people Having encouraged people to experiment with illicit substances and also to maybe try and bump off their grandparents, I think maybe that's a good place to leave it for this particular episode.
We better run it past this solicitor before we go to air.
Yes, exactly. I think we'll just about wrap it up. I really hope, and we all hope that everybody listening enjoys it. Tim, huge thanks for coming and taking part with us. It's been really good fun to have you with us.
Yeah, thank you, Tim.
Thanks once again to everyone for listening. If you enjoyed the episode, do let us know in the comments down below. And if you have any thoughts on your least favorite food, wild game foods, or have had a culinary disaster that you'd like to share with us, please also tell us about that in the comments, and maybe we'll read some of them out in the next episode. If you don't already, do subscribe to the weekly newsletter for all of our latest content and shooting availability. You can do that at GunsOnPegs.com. Or you can give us a follow on Instagram at GunsOnPegs, or find us on Facebook. Until next time, thanks very much for listening, and goodbye.